What's that?
Yeah, I was like on campus in a sweatshirt, and then all of a sudden it was like it's 29 degrees outside.
Good times. All right, so what I've got up here, I want to talk to you for just a second. This is about the exam. So interesting thing I'd never really looked at before, because I don't usually, historically have not used Canvas to do that many exams, but apparently I can see what you're up to while you're taking the exam. And so this is called an action log, and I can see it for each of you. I don't know who this is. I just randomly picked somebody. And what it showed me was person starts, they looked at a couple of questions, then they page, then they start it again, then they stop, start again, 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 stop. And then there's some time gaps, right? Stop, start again, answer the question. Oh, okay. So I'm just showing this because I want to make a point about what I've said about the exams is the exam is designed so that you don't have enough time to research every single question, right? So if you take this, if you have studied adequately, meaning again, you read the chapter, you highlight as you go through the chapter, and if you've got a digital copy, I'm not sure what you can do there. You should probably be, you should also be taking notes from the chapter, writing down the important concepts and terminology, right? You should have my slides because I cover stuff that's not in the book in the slides. And you should be taking notes either directly on the slides or taking notes and then correlating them back to the slides in preparation for the exam. This is, I did look at a couple of the logs, so this is pretty much what, from what I can see, most of you did. And so some of you were saying you didn't have enough time, and I'm telling you that if you're researching every question, you're going to run out of time, okay? So if you're finding yourself, now I realize you might get anxious and you're like, oh my God, I'm not 100% sure, I'm gonna go look that up. Fine, have at it. But bear in mind that I've written the time I've chosen to give, and the exam is written such that I expect you not to have enough time to look up every single one of them, okay? So I just want to be clear about the expectations on the exam. I'm gonna get out of this. All right, so we're going to wrap up chapter 5 today. Still a little more. This is in your text, but I want to cover it for a minute. Cost benefit analysis is a process whereby we look at the costs and the benefits of a particular treatment or innovation. And if you are running a centralized healthcare system like the British Health Service, or you're trying to or your Harvard Pilgrim or Cigna for that matter, and you're trying to decide whether you're going to cover a particular new treatment, you might have an economist on your staff who does this cost benefit analysis. And what they're doing, it's pretty straightforward. The question is, is the cost of this new treatment justified by the benefits that it yields? And so one of the assumptions we make is that a human life, 1 year of human life, is worth $100,000. So if a treatment costs $200,000, but it extends your life 3 years, then the cost per year, right, is $66,000, right? And so if I can extend a year of your life for less than $100,000, then I should probably pay for the treatment, right? If I can extend your life by more than a year, for less than $100,000, then I have a positive cost benefit analysis, right? I'm saying this is a beneficial thing. And so we want a cost benefit ratio of greater than 1, because if I had, it cost me $200,000 to extend your life for 1 year, then it would be it'd be a cost benefit ratio of a half, right? So But what if I can extend your life at a cost of $50,000, but you are intubated and unconscious? So you're alive, heart's beating, there are occasional pulses of electrical energy flowing through your brain. So you are alive in the most nominal sense. And it's costing me $50,000 a year to do that, which probably it'd be on the low side for like just putting you in a nursing home. So if you're in a nursing home in a vegetative state, we're probably paying something closer to $10,000 a month for your care. So you're a vegetative state, but let's say we could do it for under 100,000, just for let's just say 50. It's cost $50,000. So I can keep you alive as nominally as we want to consider that. And probably most of us in here would be like, I don't know. I know what I would tell my family: pull the plug. I don't want to be hanging around, because if I'm what's the word? Shut in. That's not the right word. When you're conscious but you can't move, like the butterfly in the bell jar book. Sorry. You're not vegetative. So this is the horrifying thing, right? Is you're conscious, you are aware, but you can't move any part of your body, including maybe your, there was a book called the butterfly in the bell jar or something like that. I'd look it up. And it was actually a guy, shut-in syndrome. It's something like that. I can't bring it up, but maybe one of you will think of it in a minute. Is that what it is? Shut-in syndrome? But you know what I'm talking about, right? Locked in syndrome. So locked-in syndrome is you are fully aware. It's just that you're just like this. And you may be able to blink on command, which is what this one guy did. Was he had been laying in what they thought was a vegetative state for like a year. And then somebody realized that he could like blink his left eyelid intentionally. They're like, blink your left eyelid twice if you can hear me. And he went, And they're like, oh my God, he's awake. He like knows what's going on. And so he somebody wound up sitting with him and working with him to write a book about what it was like to be in this vegetative state, not vegetative, locked in state, by like, I don't know, they had some format with like, he could pick the letters by doing a coded blinking with his eye. And that's all he could do, right, from that position. So imagine you're like that. What is your quality of life like relative to what it is right now? And you might say, you know what, I'm not super happy or whatever, maybe my girlfriend and boyfriend just broke up with me and I'm really sad. But it's still like a billion times better than being locked in, laying in a nursing home where people are just kind of coming by and treating you like a piece of meat, right? So this idea of a quality adjusted life year, QALY, says that not all conditions have the same quality of life. Like a year is not a year, right? A year as a locked-in patient is not the same thing as a year as a young person walking around, having a good time, coming to HMP 401, learning great things, right? As opposed to being locked in. Or maybe you feel like you're locked in when you're in HMP 401. I don't know, but at least you get to leave, right? So the idea is that behind QALYs is that a year is not a year. And so we make some subjective adjustments. So when we do this calculation and say, okay, 1 year of human life is worth $100,000. Now we're going to adjust it to say 1 year of a full 1.0 quality of life is worth $100,000, but 1 year maybe with severe, maybe you have, let's step aside from locked in for a minute. Let's say you have cancer and you're getting cancer treatments that will extend your life 1 year. But the side effects of those cancer treatments are you can move around some. With some difficulty and some pain, you can go to the bathroom on your own. You might need assistance bathing, but you spend a lot of time in pain. That's not the same thing as 1 year of full health, right? And so maybe we would say that, a quality adjusted life year where I can extend your life. I can keep you from dying from your cancer by 1 more year, but the cost of that to you is living in a non-trivial amount of pain. Or maybe you have to have, and lots of people live with this for many, many years. Maybe you have colon cancer and I have to do a bypass and you have to have a colostomy bag, right? Because you can't go to the bathroom on your own. That's less than, right? That is an imposition on your quality of life. Now, people can have a good quality of life if they learn to live with that, but it's not the same as not having that, right? So your life is a lower quality, right? And so when we say something like, I can extend your life 1 year, but the quality of your life is going to be 0.5 qualities instead of 1.0 qualities. Now I have to similarly reduce the cost of the treatment. So if a 1 year of full health is worth $100,000, a 0.5 quality would be only worth $50,000. So a treatment would have to be less than $50,000 in order to justify it. Does that make sense? Okay, so that's the kind of the lesson of this. I'm not going to make you do a lot of math. There's a bunch of math involved in this. I'm not going to bother with that. I just want you to understand the general idea of a QALY is a quality adjusted life year. It means that not all years of life are the same. And so if you have something, a major health issue that is reducing your quality of life, then your QALY is going to be something less than 1. So if you're living with severe illness, or the side effects of the treatment are such that the quality of life that you have going forward is less than it would have been at full health, then we're going to similarly adjust the dollar amount that we're saying the benefit is worth. So if I have a half a QALY or a third of a QALY, then my life, that extra year of life is really only worth, at a third of a QALY, it'd be only worth $33,000. Okay, so that's the basic idea. This stuff is used for real by insurance companies in the United States when so your Harvard Pilgrim is presented with, some hospital wants to do a new procedure, and Harvard Pilgrim, which is one of our big insurance regional insurance companies, then looks at it and says, what is the return on this treatment? Because we have treatment A, which we've been using for 20 years. Now you're proposing treatment B. Treatment A cost me, say cost the insurance company, say 10,000, but your new treatment is going to cost 50,000. How do I justify for me based on benefits that I should spend $40,000 more on this new treatment? And so this is the thing. So then you find, and then the insurance company will say, you know what, maybe that additional $40,000 that you're asking me to spend on this new treatment will actually give my patients, give my covered beneficiaries just that much more quality adjusted life years, in which case I would say, yes, I will pay for that. But if it comes in and says, it sounds snazzy, I'm sure it's a lot of fun for you to do that procedure, surgeon, but there's no, the cost, the benefit to cost ratio does not justify it. Let's just stay with the old procedure that costs, significantly less. And so those are the hard decisions that even in a free market, as much as, the United States is not a free market for healthcare, but even in a relatively free market economy, even if you were to imagine a purely free market economy, insurance companies in a pure free market economy would still have to make these kind of decisions, because you surrender some of your choice to the insurance company when you decide I'm going to go with an insurance company. You surrender some of your choice to the insurance company to do these kinds of calculations, to say, Angela, this procedure that you want to do, we're not going to cover it. And the reason we're not going to cover it is because the benefits do not outweigh the costs of doing this. We're going to do this older thing instead. Right. So the example the example I gave you before, we talked about hepatitis C, which was, is a bloodborne, typically blood transmitted disease. So it's most of the people who have it are either intravenous drug users or people who engage in unsafe sex practices. The vast majority of those people tend to be low income. There's a very high prevalence of Hep C in prisons we talked about, right? And so you have to say, now you're the state Medicaid, or you're the federal prison system, and you're trying to figure out what your obligation is to the prisoners. And do you pay for generic treatment? So Hep C has been around for a long time, right? So we have some generic treatments that treat it as a chronic disease, or I can give you a 12-week series of pharmaceutical treatments that will fully cure you of the disease. So there's an example, right? You can live with Hep C. It's unpleasant, right? And you're contagious. And if you have unprotected sex of a particular type, you are likely to transmit that to your partner. So you're creating more, spreading more disease. Or I could completely completely cure you. And so you talk about the quality of life differences, right? What's quality of life with Hep C? Well, it's probably less than 1. What's quality of life without Hep C? Well, otherwise speaking, would be 1. So now we can do a mathematical comparison. So those are the kinds of calculations that are being done. All right. Now, all economic resources are rationed in some way. Healthcare is an economic resource. What do I mean? Economic resources are scarce by definition, meaning there's never as much of it to go around as we would like to have. So non-economic resources are things like oxygen, for the most part. I mean, you can argue with me, if you live in New York City or Beijing, it's not as nice to breathe, but for the most part, we're not talking about, a shortage of oxygen. But pretty much anything you're going to have to pay for or buy, or somebody's going to have to buy for you, is an economic resource. So your car you drive, the water bottle, your computer, your pencil, these are all economic resources, and they are rationed in in some way. Market economies ration based on price. We have price-based rationing. So the kind of mean way of saying this is basically, if you're rich, you get whatever you want. If you're poor, you're going to have to really try to pick between, do I pay for school, or do I pay for my car, or do I pay for my apartment, or do I pay for food? One of those things has got to go because I don't have enough resources for all. And so so those things are rationed as a result of price. Things get expensive when they go into shorter supply. So when there's less of something available, the price goes up so that the people who value it the most are willing to pay for it. Then we have non-price-based rationing, or political rationing is the most common version of this. And so healthcare, so your book would like us all to engage in political rationing of healthcare, because healthcare is too important to be rationed by prices in the market. This is pretty much, I'm paraphrasing what they say in the book. When they talk about justice, they say that healthcare is too important to have it be determined by the market. Well, there are some problems with that. Non-priced rationing comes into effect when you make it free, right? Or when you subsidize it. When you as an individual, right, are not paying for your own healthcare. When you pay for your own healthcare, you make decisions based on the price of the healthcare. So if I tell you, hey, you know what, if I'm your primary care provider, and I say, Caroline, was it Carol or Caroline? Was your name Carol or Caroline? Caroline. So I say to Caroline, when I say to Caroline over here, hey, you know, your knee pain, I think you should get an MRI. And Caroline says, okay, I guess I'll go do that. And if Caroline has good insurance, she might only have to pay $50 to get her MRI, regardless of where she goes to get it. Now, on the Seacoast, here on the Seacoast, you have a whole bunch of choices as to where you go get your MRI. Caroline could go to Wentworth Douglas and have it done in the hospital and pay, say, $1,800 for her MRI. Or she could go to Seacoast Imaging and get her MRI for $500. Now, the thing about insurance is Caroline only pays $50, whether she does it at Seacoast Imaging or whether she does it at Wentworth Douglas, right? And so Caroline is relatively indifferent between getting it at Wentworth Douglas or Seacoast Imaging. But if Caroline doesn't have insurance, if she's paying for it out of pocket, she will be more inclined to ask that question. She may turn to Alila and say, Alila, where'd you get your MRI? And Alila say, I got a great bargain at Seacoast Imaging. They only charge me $500, right? And so Caroline will then go to Seacoast Imaging rather than going to Wentworth Douglas. That's price rationing, right? And then she may say, you know what, that's price allocation. Actually, that's price allocation. She's choosing between where to get her MRI done. She may say at $500, if she has to pay that $500 out of pocket, she's now going to say, okay, $500, rent is $1,000. You know, my tuition and fees at UNH are absurd, right? I might just not get the MRI and wait. Because the other thing I could say to her as a good primary care doctor is, I could send you for an MRI. It's probably not broken. You know, if we want to try to figure out exactly what's going on, you know, I'll send you to get an MRI. You can choose. And you say, okay, well, how much is, and then we get into the whole game of how much is that? Well, at $50, she doesn't really even think about it. She just goes and gets it, right? But at $500, even if she can get a great deal, thanks to her buddy Alila, at $500, as a poor college student, she actually has to think about that a little bit, because if she spends $500 on an MRI, she can't go to Scarce this weekend and drink a bunch of beer, right? Because she's not going to have any money left for the beer, and we all know what the priority is. So what she might say instead, the primary care provider might say, you know, you're young, healthy, you know, college student. Chances are, if you just wait 6 weeks, the pain will go away, as most orthopedic injuries do, right? So unless you have like an actual tear, and you know what, even if you do have an actual tear, if you wait 6 weeks, it'll probably still be there, and it probably won't get a whole lot worse. So unless you're a student athlete, right? Are you on any of the like? So she's not. So she's like, you know what, $500 is a lot of money. I'll just wait. That is price rationing, right? Now she makes a choice based on prices that maybe she doesn't really need this thing. And lo and behold, 6 weeks, the doctor says, fine, take 800 milligrams of Motrin 3 times a day. That's like 50 cents a day treatment. Take that, right, for the next 3 weeks. And if the pain goes away, you don't have to come back and see me, and you can stop taking the Motrin. She takes the Motrin, 3 weeks later, she's fine, right? So price rationing, if Caroline had insurance, right, she might have said, yeah, get me to the next MRI. My knee hurts. I really want to figure out what this all is. On the flip side, if she has to pay $500 for it, she might say, well, you know, I can wait. Let's try that Motrin after all. Right? So that's an example of price rationing. If you're rich, if Alila was like, you know, Mark Zuckerberg's long lost child, then she might be like, you know, I have billions of dollars. $50 is like nothing, you know, or $500 is like nothing. I'm just going to get the MRI. In fact, have them bring it to my dorm. You know, I don't want to be bothered with actually like going anywhere. Okay, but non-price rationing says, all right, you know, healthcare is so important, none of us should have to pay anything for it. Well, now, right, if in the UK, you pay nothing for your care, right? Or you pay, I don't know, you pay some, small dollar amount maybe. Canada, same thing. Well, the thing here is like you can get an MRI in the United States in like, 48 hours if you want to get one. It might cost your insurance company $2,000. But if you want to get an MRI in Canada, your book has a bunch of waiting times that Canadian citizens face for things like MRIs. And I think it's like 10 weeks. So yay, it's free, but you're going to have to wait 10 weeks unless your doctor says this is an emergency, which clearly a little bit of knee pain in a college age kid is not a medical emergency. So Caroline would have to wait 10 weeks, at which point the pain's probably going to be gone and she's going to cancel the appointment because she's young and healthy. But the point is, how do we allocate when we move out of the market? Well, politicians decide how much resources are put into different things, like how many MRI machines should we have? What's an optimal number of MRI machines? What's the right number of cardiac surgeons? What's the right number of nursing homes? All these questions have to be answered if you centralize and engage in non-price-based rationing. In other words, if you have a government-run system that is financed by the taxpayer, operated by the government, like the British Health Services, the government has to decide how many MRI machines should there be, how many hospitals, how many primary care providers, and so on. Under a market-based economy, prices decide how many hospitals there are, how many MRI machines there are, because under a market system, if I'm able to charge $2,000 for an MRI, some radiologist is going to say, well, I could just buy my own MRI machine. I already make boatloads of money. I could buy my own MRI machine, even though it's like $2 million. I buy my own MRI machine and set up my own imaging center, which is what radiologists often do now, is they'll set up their own imaging center, and I'll undercut that price because I can make a boatload of profit and I can charge $1,500, and I'll start stealing business from the hospital. And the hospital will say, oh, shoot, well, we have to bring our price down. So, we'll bring it down to meet the imaging center price. And the imaging center is like, well, I was clearing like $1,400 on every $1,500 MRI. So I can still go down some more. So I'll go down, and so they keep going down and going down. So pretty soon you have them doing $500 MRIs at their imaging center, and the hospital can't go down any more than what it's at, because the imaging is a profit center for hospitals. They help, and we'll get into this later, but there are parts of the hospital that lose money and parts of the hospital that make money. The parts of the hospital that make money are imaging, lab, pharmacy. Parts of the hospital that lose money are things like obstetrics, right? Labor and delivery, where you have babies, always loses money. And so they have a loss leader and a profit center. So the number of imaging centers in the United States is based on how profitable, what's the profit opportunity. The number of imaging centers in Canada is based on what Justin Trudeau says. He's the president. What Justin Trudeau says the number of imaging centers should be. Now, Justin Trudeau is a very smart guy, and he has a bunch of smart people working for him. But you have to ask yourself, is the accumulated knowledge in the market with everybody buying and selling more accurate, better projection of how many of whatever we need than some little old lady in tennis shoes, right? Sitting in the basement of the Center for Medicare and Medicaid. So your answer to that depends on, it really kind of tells you which way you fall on this. But non-price-based rationing is ultimately a political decision then, right? And non-price rationing is done by things like supply side controls, which are, again, decided by the government. So they allow for long waiting periods. They are very stringent about the approval of technologies. They use things like the cost benefit ratio. They limit formularies. which is why Europe was late in getting the vaccines that we got right away, because they kept trying to negotiate for a better deal from Pfizer and from Moderna, instead of just saying, what we said was, blank check, here you go, send us all of them, right? And so we got all of them. We paid a lot of money for it, but we got all of them. And Europe was like, but we're in the middle of negotiating. And I said, well, we got blank check from US, so we'll see you in a couple of months, when we're done with the US. Now, my personal experience, I will tell you about living in and operating in a government-run system. The military runs its own healthcare system. If you are a person of significance, you get better care, right? Not so much better care. Well, you definitely get more attention, and it probably does amount to better care, but you get a better quality of experience if you are a senior officer in the military. So at Walter Reed Medical Center in Washington, D.C., which is the premier military hospital, fantastic hospital, amazing hospital. There is a whole ward, right, set aside for general officers and admirals and their wives. So if you are a what we call a flag officer, which is the tippity top of the military hierarchy, you get special care. You get concierge care, right? And the rest of us go through the line, cattle call style line. Now, it's great care, right? Don't get me wrong. What you get in the military is excellent care, but you're going to get your hand held. You're going to have a nice, a private room when in the military, everybody else has got 2 or 3 people in the room with them, right? You're going to get special treatment. You're going to get, better meals, all that other stuff. That's how political rationing works. If you are politically powerful, the system bows to you. The only difference between price-based rationing and political rationing is rich people get stuff, rich people the system bow to because they can pay for it. Under political rationing, powerful people get politically connected, and powerful people get whatever they want. So it's really just kind of which system would you like? Because chances are you are not going to be one of those special people, right? So kind of doing the Rawlsian veil of ignorance, like I'm going to set this system up, without knowing where I'm going to land. There's always going to be this kind of top tier of people that get special care. Yeah, and like the president goes to Walter Reed. When Reagan got shot, that's where they took him, was Walter Reed, right? He got to stay on the admiral and general floor. So it really is kind of, pick your poison. Economic goods, there are a limited number of them. They have to be allocated in some fashion. One way to do it is to allocate based on price. One way to do it is to allocate based on political influence and power. You take your pick, but you're going to have to pick. You don't get to say, the world we live in doesn't get to say, that's not fair, we're not going to do it that way. That's not one of the choices that we get to choose. All right, I got to move along a little faster. All right, so in that same vein, we're going to get to some actual equipment here because it's a lot of fun to talk about, but I need to talk about these economic ideas. So there's this thing called Certificate of Need laws. It was passed in 1974, a federal mandate that states had to create these programs called Certificate of Need laws, where you had a board would decide if there was a need for a new service in the state. So for example, if you wanted to build a hospital in Durham, you'd have to go to the con board to prove that there was actually a need. If you wanted to build a new nursing home, you would have to go to the con board to prove that there was a need. Now, the con board is a public board, right? It's people from the community are elected to the board or appointed to the board by the governor. I serve on a board for the state that licenses nursing home administrators. So if you are going to be a nursing home administrator in the state of New Hampshire, I put my grubby little fingers on your application, along with about 10 other people. That's not what this is, though, right? So this was, it's similar, but different purpose. So let's imagine that let's see. Let's imagine that. What's your name, sir? Sean, and what's your name, ma'am? Michaela. So Sean currently operates a nursing home here in Durham. He's doing very well. There's a waiting list. There are people waiting to get in. Right? So he runs a really nice little facility. He's got 100 beds. They're all full, and there's a waiting list of 25 people waiting to get in. Michaela gets wind of this and says, that's really interesting. There's an opportunity here for me. I could build a nursing home, and I could probably, if Sean's got a waiting list of 25 people, I could definitely get all of them. And then there's probably more demand out there that I could get as well. So she starts to make a plan, and her friend Angela says, hey, by the way, before you build that nursing home, you have to go to the con board and get approval. So she says, okay, no problem. And so she goes to the con board, and she brings her plan. I'm going to make this beautiful nursing home. It's going to serve the people of Durham. We know that there aren't enough nursing home beds in Durham. And I think I can probably even bring in some people from Lee and Madbury and so forth. I'm pretty sure I can fill this thing up. Who else is there? Sean, he's there, right? He's there, and he's saying, hold on. There's really no need for another nursing home in Durham, right? I mean, I'm taking care of people, and we're going to have this inefficient competition, and then pretty soon small children will be crying in the streets, and nothing will be as good as it once was. And so this is kind of goes back to the bootleggers and Baptist thing, right? What is Sean trying to do? Well, Sean is trying to protect his profit, right? What he's trying to do is, because if Michaela moves in and sets up a competing nursing home, she's going to pull those 25 people off his waiting list. But not only that, Sean currently charges $200 a day for one of his beds. Michaela is going to price at $190, right? So not only is Michaela going to snag the 25 people that couldn't get into Sean's facility, but some of the family members of Sean's current residents are going to look and see, Sean's charging $200, Michaela's charging $190. Michaela's got a pretty nice facility too. We're going to take grandma, out of Sean's facility and bring her over to Michaela's facility. And Sean knows this is what's going to happen. And so what Sean knows is if Michaela builds her facility, he's going to have to bring his rates down, because the two of them are going to start competing on price. Right? And so Sean, to prevent that, Sean is going to go to the con board and try to make his best case, or better yet, he's going to hire a lobbyist, right, to do that for him. He's going to try to make his best case as to why the con board should not approve Michaela's new project. And that's really, really what happened, and really, really what happens when you have systems like that put into place. You now have political competition, right? So Sean might then start, through his lobbyist, might start making donations to Governor Sununu, right? Who then kind of calls somebody on the board and says, Bob, you know me for a while, I'm really concerned about this wasteful competition. That's a favorite word to be used, wasteful competition there in Durham. I'd really appreciate it if you look carefully at Michaela's proposal. Not sure it's really needed, but you're free to make your decision however you like. And oh, by the way, remember, how you had that plan to build that new gas station down on, we're currently looking at that too. So there's a little bit of favor trading going on. That's how politics works. So these con boards introduced a lot of inefficiency into the market. New Hampshire did away with their con board not that long ago, actually. We were one of the last holdouts. Most states still have some sort of con laws, but they are kind of slowly being whittled away. Vermont, ironically, has some of the most pervasive and intrusive con. It's not called a con law. It's called the Green Mountain Care Board, and you can Google them up on the internet and see how they talk about how they're making sure that we have how they're taking care of cost, quality, and access. They use that kind of language that we've been talking about. Right? They're the ones that are making sure that care is efficient and available and low cost to everybody. I will tell you, I know lots of leaders of healthcare organizations in Vermont, and they have very little nice to say about the Green Mountain Care Board when you get them outside of earshot of anybody that might be associated with the Green Mountain Care Board. So it's really interesting because we have this kind of, we have this situation where we have New Hampshire and Vermont right here and completely different policy environments. Okay. So con laws, I'm not a fan. I'm not even going to make bones about it. Mostly because of the dynamic that I just described. All right, so now let's talk about actual medical devices, right? So we've been talking about and medical technology. So I'm going to buzz through some of this stuff. The United States has the best stuff, right? If you get sick, this is where you want to be. You don't want to be necessarily, most likely, unless you've got something really simple, you don't want to be in one of those other countries. You want to be here. You want your loved ones to be here. Now, medical equipment broadly used by providers to deliver care, right? We talked about this idea of complements. This complement is something that a provider uses to kind of enhance their abilities. A substitute is when we can use technology to get rid of, in particular, human labor. So specialists really rely heavily on medical equipment. Radiologists, what's a radiologist without some sort of imaging tool? Just a guy, right? He's a nice guy, but he's just a guy. Surgeons, think about it. We're going to talk about robotic surgery here in a minute. Remarkable improvements in outcomes from robotic surgery if you're trained on it. We talked already about this idea of the hospital as a doctor's workshop. Hospitals compete by trying to bring in the best of care, the best equipment, the best equipment to attract physicians. Nursing in particular relies on medical equipment as a form of substitution. And I've got some cool examples. And it doesn't have to be particularly high tech. It doesn't have to be particularly fancy and sexy. Right? So talking about radiologists, right? So here's an MRI, right? We're doing an MRI. Why do we do an MRI versus an X-ray? X-rays work really well on dense matter like bones. So if you think you've broken an arm or a leg, an X-ray is perfectly fine. But if you've got knee pain, and first thing they'll do is an X-ray because it's cheap, right? You can get a knee X-ray for $50, and it's quick. Cheap and quick. But if the injury is to your soft tissue, the X-ray can't see that. Right? So if you've got, if you're looking for a mass or something like that, like an X-ray has some usefulness, but I mean, you can look at that. That's amazing, right? You are not. Is she wearing jewelry?
She's wearing jewelry.
All right, nice, well found. Yeah, maybe that's just a model, but yeah, apparently. So this is amazing technology that's really not that old, right? We take it for granted now, but it's 40 years old, right? So this is really amazing technology. It's a complement. It's expensive technology. It's a substitute in some ways for X-ray. It's also, what it is a substitute for surgery. Because if, back in the day, pre-MRI days, I could X-ray you, but I couldn't see soft tissue injuries. So the only way for me to figure out what was going on would be to open you up and take a look, right? Whereas with MRI, you don't have to do we'll have to do exploratory surgery. You can eliminate exploratory surgery. So there's a process of substitution happening all the time in healthcare, where we can substitute. It may be expensive. It's cheaper than surgery though, right? So this is still cheaper than surgery, and it's a lot less harmful than surgery. You do not want to have surgery if you do not have to have surgery. Right? So it's an improvement in quality outcomes. It's an improvement in benefits, even if it's expensive. This is robotic surgery. This is a Davinci robot. So I put a little arrow. The surgeon is sitting over there, right? He's in the room, but he's over there, and he's got two little joysticks, like he's playing Mario Kart while he's, operating on you. And the robot is right here. The robot can, so a surgeon has to have perfectly steady hands, right? Well, what if you get old? They're like, surgery is a physical activity. As you get older, your hands get a little wobblier, right? They're not, and you can't have the same endurance. The robot can compensate for your shake, right? By just not moving, randomly. So it can do that. It can do these things in a more precise manner. And not only that, it can do it with less, it can do it laparoscopically. So these tubes get inserted into you, right, through small incisions, and they can do an operation that used to be that they would have to zip you open and pop you open, right? Now they can do it. It's called, this technology is called laparoscopic surgery. It is basically some sticks. They look like sticks with, I don't know, do you ever have the kid toy that had like a handle and then a stick and it had a claw on the end? You could like squeeze this and the claw would go, right? Well, that's basically what laparoscopic surgery, not the Davinci, but surgeons will these advances happened mostly in the 80s. Surgeons were able to, we invented laparoscopic surgery, and it's kind of wild to watch. Surgery is actually really violent. It's not as like pretty as it looks like on, Grey's Anatomy. I once got to kind of watch from outside a couple of general surgeons doing a laparoscopic repair of a what's that called when you're like intestines poke through, hernia. Thank you, a hernia repair. So they were doing it laparoscopically. So they had, I could see them stand outside, and they had like the sticks with the handles on them, and they were doing the surgery. And man, they were going like, yeah, to this guy's gut. And I'm like, no wonder that guy's going to be sore tomorrow. Like, holy crap. He says, in there jamming away, right? But nonetheless, when he wakes up, he's going to have like 2 or 3, 4 little incisions. Whereas hernia operation used to be that zip you open, pull you open, and then, do the repair and then close you up. The recovery from that would have, so it used to be if you got hernia repair, for example, you would spend a week in the hospital recovering. Well, yeah, it's because I zipped you open, right? The great big wound, and got in there and dug around and then closed you back up. That's a lot more to recover from than if I just do, a couple of 1-inch cuts, stick the sticks in, and even as much as I'm kind of turning your guts into mush by doing that, right? But the recovery is just so much less. And you don't open the body up to exposure to germs. Right? There's just so many good things about that. Now, not all surgeries can be done laparoscopically, but that was a huge advance. The Davinci robot just kind of keeps building on that. So the Davinci robot's laparoscopic as well, but now the surgeon is sitting off to the side. I think, and I haven't really discussed this with any of my surgeon friends, but the surgeon is now 3 feet away. Could we take him and put him 30 feet away? Why not? It's all being done by computer at this point anyway, right? Could we take him, so could we have like a cube farm full of surgeons? Imagine like at Mass General. So they have like the operating rooms down the hall, and the surgeons are all sitting in the cube farm on their video game surgeries, right? And the surgery is happening down the hall. So if anything happens, they can jump up and run down and do it in person. But otherwise, it's just the nurses and the patients and all. So take that, right? Because the surgeon is no longer touching the body. Take that a step further. Imagine the cube farm at Mass General, and Mass General has all these other hospitals, including, say, Wentworth Douglas, right? Or imagine, like, there's one of my favorite places to go in the summer when I go out to visit my interns is I drive up to Berlin, New Hampshire. Anybody been to Berlin? I think I've asked this before. You been to Berlin? Are you from Berlin? No, okay. So Berlin's way up there, right? So Berlin's got a nice little hospital called Androscoggin Valley Hospital. It's run by a friend of mine named Mike Peterson. And Mike struggles to keep, high level physicians in his, to come to Berlin because it's way up there. And it's a small hospital and small community. So there's not a lot of work to be done up there. So he usually borrows, he gets part FTEs of different surgeons. Well, imagine this. You need a hernia repair, something simple, not typically something life-threatening. You live in Berlin. You get examined. Yep, you've got a hernia repair. You need a hernia repair. Come in on Tuesday morning. We're going to set you up. You go in. You get checked in. They gown you up. They bring you into the OR, and there's an iPad, doctor on a stick, iPad. With the doctor the surgeon's about to do it. He's sitting in Boston, and you're his third case of the day. The first case was in, Claremont, New Hampshire. The second one's was in, Bucksport, Maine. And now you're the third one on the day. And he's been sitting in his cube in Mass General the whole time. So what do we have present in the room with you? We've got a surgical PA. He's got, a master's degree in PA studies. He did a fellowship in surgery. In PA surgical support, along with an operating room team of nurses. They lay you down, they set you up, they bring the machine in, and they tell the doctor, all set, ready to go, and the doctor starts working on you from Boston, right? And meanwhile, you're 3.5 hours north and from Boston and Berlin. He finishes up, says, all right, I've made the repairs, PA, you take over from here. Logs off and goes to his fourth surgery, which now is in, Keene, New Hampshire, right? And he's doing it all from one place. What an incredibly efficient use of a very high cost asset, right? So we could have really incredible surgeons that now we don't have to waste having a surgeon sitting up in Berlin, right? We can have surgeons sitting in a place like Mass Gen where they can continue to get good exposure to complex cases, right? But then they can also provide their services. I think that's the future. I don't know that I have a whole lot of people that agree with me just yet, because I think most surgeons will be like, no way in hell I'm doing that because of too much risk to my license. But I think if you can take the surgeon away from the patient, this initial stage, there's no reason why we can't pull him further and further back from the patient. Yeah, Alila. Right.
Or like, I think, what happens if a surgeon who does surgery and then, they're both so close together that they go off to the next surgery and as, so.
Right.
And then it's like, okay, well, we're gonna use the machine.
Right. So that's the real question is, what if something goes wrong? What do we do? And so that's the problem that needs to be answered before we can take to that next step. But you could imagine, for example, I think an intermediate step would be, well, my base answer would be, you've got to have somebody who's got a high enough level of education and skill that if something goes wrong, they can stabilize the patient so that the patient can then be moved to a higher level of care. So that would be why you have the surgical PA there or something along the, or you could imagine I have a subspecialist surgeon that's sitting at Mass General and I have a general surgeon on site, right? So that if something goes wrong, they can the point would be they can stabilize you and ship you to higher level of care. That would be my, and bear in mind, I'm just like this is reality right now. What I just described is like, at best 20 years from now, right? And maybe will never happen, but I think it will. Now the problem with the, even today, right? The problem with the Davinci Robots, it's $1 million machine. And the problem with that is, most surgeons today are being trained on them as we go. But there were, I know some surgeons who've been out for a long time who graduated from their residency in the 80s or 90s, right? Predating this, laparoscopic surgery was cutting edge when they were going through, never mind using robots. But robot is what the industry is moving towards. And I've talked to the younger surgeons, they're like, absolutely, robot is what you want. If you're having surgery, you want robotic surgery. It's more precise. It gets better outcomes. Early on, it wasn't getting early on, we weren't getting the same outcomes because the surgeons who were running them were old school, and having to learn this new trick. People who are coming up now, so if one of you decides to go to medical school and become a surgeon, this is the tool you're going to learn on. You'll learn to do it somewhat manually. It's a little bit like, hey, I'm going to teach you how to do these complex, calculations. But in reality, whenever you do this, you're going to do it either on your calculator, and your calculator is going to be able to do all the calculations, without you having to understand the underlying formulas, or you'll do it in Excel or something like that, right? So surgeon, you're going to learn how to do, you'll learn how to do a hernia repair once without a robot, and then all the other times you'll do it with a robot, just in case. But it's $1 million, and you don't get to charge more for a hernia repair done with a robot than a hernia repair done without a robot. So somehow you have to make up that $1 million in equipment costs, right? And so the only way to do that is to do more of them faster, if you have to buy the robot than not. And you have to have better quality outcomes so that, and so forth. So that's puts a lot of pressure on the system to perform. All right. Smart hospital beds. This is a really cool thing. Like I'm going to keep saying it, really cool thing, right? This is, you get put into a bed and you can see all the monitors are in the bed, like they're built into the mattress. You just lay there and you don't have to be hooked up to anything hardly. And it keeps heart rate and blood pressure and all that kind of, it's a smart bed. And this can be then hooked up to a terminal that feeds into a nurse's station, right? That the nurse can monitor, right, more accurately what's going on. Now these beds cost $100,000, right? This is not your grandmother's hospital bed. This bed costs $100,000. Now what's really cool about this is, and this is really happening right now, is Dartmouth-Hitchcock has remote ICU support. So Androscoggin in Berlin has beds like this set up for their patients, and they're being monitored by a nurse sitting in a cube farm. I kid you not, sitting in a cube farm in Hanover or Lebanon now, monitoring patients in Berlin and other places, in remote places where they provide ICU support to these hospitals, because it's hard for them to maintain the proper level of staffing without this kind of support. So when I say, I can imagine a day where surgery is happening remotely, that's because these kinds of things are already happening remotely. It's just another step in the logical chain of events. It's amazing, right? But it's expensive. $100,000 bed versus say a $10,000 bed. Now this is a complement to the nurse, right? It provides the nurse more information, and maybe you can even eliminate some of your nursing staff because you don't have to run around and do a blood pressure. You don't have to run around and check vitals because the bed is doing it constantly. So that improves quality of care because you don't, make your rounds every hour and check their vitals. The bed knows, and the bed will tell you, hey, so-and-so in room 7 is showing that their heart rate is off and you should come check, and then they do. So you can have fewer nurses because the bed is doing some of the work for them. So it's a complement, and it improves the ability of the nurse to care for the patients. Here's a little bit of a less, like exciting and sexy thing, but it eliminates workers, right? So this kind of thing was already operating way back in the early 90s. I remember we had a little robot looked something like this that drove around the hospital I was working in 1992, and it would pick up lab results. It would pick up labs from different clinics in the hospital and then bring them to the lab, and then, and then go back. So, that eliminates some low-level employee from having to run around and pick up lab results and deliver them, right? So you can substitute this little delivery robot for manpower. This thing could deliver a whole bunch of things, like, so I'm talking about lab results, but imagine it could deliver meals, right? So you could have, maybe not this one, but something like it could come rolling down the hallway with trays in it, right, to deliver to a ward. So that would eliminate some of the dietary tech requirements. Medications, could deliver, this could be delivering medications from the inpatient pharmacy up to the ward. So now a pharmacy tech doesn't have to walk up with them, right? So that's an example of a substitute. This is a really important thing. My father-in-law used to sell these actually for a company called Secure Care, which was out of New Hampshire. I don't know whether they still exist or not. So this is a patient lift. So what this does is particularly so his primary clients were nursing homes. Moving a patient. So you have a resident who's not able, their ADLs. They're not able to, their activities of daily living, they're not able to transfer from a bed to a wheelchair or from a wheelchair to a toilet. So if they're not able to do that, you're going to have to do it for them. And without the lift, you'd probably need 3 people to do that. Nurse injuries are injuries. Nursing staff get all kinds of injuries moving patients, right? So the bed lift can eliminate manpower, and it can keep your workforce safer and healthier by preventing back strain and things like that, right? So and it's super low tech. Like there's very little, there may be no electric, it could be completely hydraulic, no electronics at all. And it's safer for the patient, right? This thing is less likely to slip and drop the patient, and that's a big, or resident, that's a big fear in nursing homes, is patient falls. This is a really exciting, this is like just a couple of weeks ago. There are these, so medical devices, we've been talking about kind of medical devices as tools. We have medical devices that are implanted. So this is really exciting. This is just from, this story ran February 7th. This guy was in an accident, severed his spinal cord. So no more signal from spinal cord down to his legs, right? So doctor said, you'll never walk again. Well, now they did some implants that it's not repairing the spinal cord, but it allows him to walk with a walker. So I don't understand the science. Again, not that kind of doctor. But what it is allowing him to do is it's sending signals to his legs such that he can move along. He can walk with a walker. Yes, ma'am. Electrostimulation, right? So yeah, because your nerves are just an electrical system, right? So you have to, if the spinal cord gets cut, it's like you've cut the wires to your electrical supply, right? So they're bypassing that using these electrostimulation of the nervous system. So that's an example of implantable technology, cutting edge, like literally just a couple of weeks ago, that this is first of happening. So super exciting. Much more common. Left side here is a pacemaker, a cardiac resynchronization therapy, or cardiac resynchronization therapy, CRT. Right, so this is an implanted. It's got these nodes that go down into your heart. That if your heart stops beating in proper rhythm, it shocks them. So it's kind of like having a little, like you see on the all the healthcare dramas, like his heart stopped beating. Quick, grab the paddles, charge. Blah, jumps up, and then everything, and then pretty soon he's off having coffee with his friends, which is not at all accurate. This, instead of being external, is like inside your body, and it like zaps your heart whenever it stops beating or stops beating in a proper manner. Made by Medtronic. This is an insulin pump. So this is, it's not really implant. I probably a little bit of exaggeration call it an implant, but it is stuck in you. It is continuously monitoring your blood sugar levels, and then that pack on the side pumps in insulin as needed. So you can just kind of go along in your life if you have diabetes and not constantly be having to prick yourself if after every meal. And so the machine just does it. Here's a crazy thing that happened. These are these devices are all internet enabled now. So think about that for a minute. You've got something that zaps your heart or pumps insulin to your body. If you get too much insulin, you will die, right? Same, obviously, same with the heart. So these are internet enabled. These, in fact, they're like showing the smartphone because the guy's getting the reports on his smartphone, right? And maybe controlling it, or gal, I can't tell from the image. Getting reports on the smartphone. Well, a scientist realized that Medtronic was not like securing the internet access to these devices. So somebody could like walk by you with some evil person could walk by you with a smartphone, but oh, hey, I can log on to her insulin pump. Jack up that insulin. Let's see what happens, right? Now, luckily, none of that ever happened. Or, hey, I wonder what it'd be like if I started, having him. I wonder if I can make him dance by zapping his heart 100 times, right? Luckily, never happened, but it took a lot of effort by this guy. And this is documented on the. You can find some stories about it, but he really had to push Medtronic to lock down the interfaces. So an interesting thing, I just tell that as kind of a fun story, but now if you go to, so if you've got that CRT, you can go to see your cardiologist and they can just, get reports virtually, right? As opposed to having to open you up and check the status. All right. Prosthetics, I'm going to have you really remarkable, especially in the last 20 years, as a result of the Iraq and Afghanistan wars, in terms of how effective they are, in terms of making them look more human. I've got you watching a video. I don't know if you've watched this Beautiful Limbs video yet. It's one of my favorite TED Talks of all time. I really love it. I even emailed the guy to say how much I thought it was really cool. And we chatted a little bit back and forth about different things he's working on. But this is a great story about designing artificial limbs that are not only effective but attractive to look at. Kind of talked already about this, so I won't belabor it again. But 23andMe had all kinds of fights with the FDA about whether they were a medical device or not, and ultimately the FDA said, if people can use this to make medical decisions, basically it boils down to, if people can use this technology to make medical decisions, then you are a medical device. My argument would be, still, if you are a grown-up and you want to know this information, you have the right to know this information. And the FDA shouldn't get in the way, because all you're doing is spitting in a tube, right? So there's no risk to using this thing. And I had this argument. There was one of my colleagues was a health economist, a real health economist. I'm not. I am an economist, just not like an actual health economist. And so we got in an argument because he was very much a progressive. And I was like, I don't understand why they, like, we're adults. Like, if I want to know that I've got a 75% chance of getting Parkinson's disease, if I want to know that, I should be able to get that information. And his argument was, no, you should have to go through a doctor. Because what if some stupid person took this 23andMe thing, saw that they had a result that said something like, you've got a 75% chance of Parkinson's disease, and they went and jumped off a bridge. And I'm like, well, one less stupid person in the world is my attitude. But, but that is the kind of, the idea, I think the underlying idea behind regulating this is we have to protect people from their own stupidity. I'm not a big fan of that, right? If you're stupid, or not, it's not the government's place to say, to protect me from myself. In particular, this thing that literally all I'm doing is spitting in a vial and giving it to them, and then they're giving me a bunch of information. Now, that said, if you got a result that was significant, you'd want to go see a geneticist, right? And get a more accurate interpretation. So you can pick your own choice on that. So, but what about, I know I saw it left around the other day. I think a couple of you have Apple Watches. Apple Watches can do all kinds of things. They're actually better than, Apple Watches now are actually better than some medical devices in terms of measuring cardiac health, right? So it's actually the quality of and the accuracy of the diagnostic capabilities of things like Apple Watches just keep on getting better. And so, at some point, if you apply that same logic that they applied to 23andMe, they're gonna have to, either turn off certain apps or do something. Otherwise, the Apple Watch will have to be arguably a medical device and be regulated. Pharmaceuticals, this is just amazing. The mRNA thing is just amazing. And the cool thing about mRNA is Moderna wasn't really focused on vaccines per se when it was working with the mRNA idea. They were, so vaccines are just one application to mRNA. What is likely going to come from this, and probably in your lifetime, maybe even in mine, is something like this will be able to be put into a customized to you and your cancer, if you get cancer, and they'll basically like give you a shot, and the mRNA will go in and program your T cells to go kill the cancer, right? That's where they're headed with this, and they're a long way from it. Don't like go out there and Professor Bonica said we're all going to be cured of cancer next year. No, but the idea that's kind of the stimulus for mRNA treatment is really more focused on this kind of customized, patient-centric treatments that are coming down the pike, where we're going to have individualized care for things like cancer, because every cancer is different. If you have cancer and someone else has the same cancer, it's a different DNA sequence, and it's going to respond differently to chemotherapies and other kinds of therapies, because cancer comes from an error in replication of a cell, right? Well, that error can happen almost anywhere. And so there's some commonalities, right? There's some commonalities, but every cancer is unique. And so the only way to treat cancer is to figure out how we customize down to the individual patient appropriate cancer care. So mRNA is a step in that direction. This mRNA drugs are a step in that direction. Really exciting stuff. We've talked about Hep C, HIV. I don't have news about this, but like a couple of weeks ago, they're now reporting there was a woman, I think a second patient now that they believe has been cured of HIV, not just on maintenance, but cured of HIV, which is incredible. Right? So still in the experimental stages, but when I was your age, right, HIV was running wild when I was your age. It was the late 80s, so all the, everybody was freaking out. It was kind of like early COVID, where like we didn't know, we had to like, do you wash your groceries? Do you, it was basically like, hey, if you have sex, you're just gonna die, so don't do anything. There's certain people that were really excited about that, but the rest of us were terrified, like, oh my God, and then eventually we realized, well, it's not quite that simple. But also early on, if you got HIV, you're going to die. It was end of discussion, game over. It was just a matter of, some short amount of time, you were going to die a horrible death. Today, HIV, like Hep C, has been turned into a chronic illness. There's a podcaster who I am a huge fan of named Andrew Sullivan, who was, he's a journalist turned podcaster. He's a gay man, and he is generally regarded as one of the leaders of the marriage equality effort. And he was diagnosed with HIV in 1992. He occasionally talks about that. So he's had HIV going on 30 years, and he's been living with it, right? So pharmaceuticals make that possible. We've talked about Harvoni, that's the hepatitis C treatment. So why are pharmaceuticals so expensive? Well, reality is it costs close to $1 billion to develop and market a new pharmaceutical. Now, why is that a problem? Well, there's this thing called a patent, right? And a patent says gives you a monopoly on being able to produce and sell a particular thing. And it's not just for drugs, it's also for computers and smartphones and anything else that can be uniquely manufactured. After 20 years, your design is public. Anybody can produce it. So if I spend $1 billion to develop a drug, after 20 years, Alila can come in and start making it and just steal my patent, steal my design, right? And she can start making it for 10 cents a piece. And I've spent $1 billion. So in the 20 years that I have on patent, I have to price my drug high enough that that I can make all that investment back. Now, here's the thing. I usually patent my drug way in advance of it actually going to market. So chances are I might patent my drug here, when I have some initial results, and then it takes me 5 or 7 more years to bring it to market. So in fact, my patent in the meantime is ticking down. So all I have left is 12 years to make back my $1 billion investment. Tag on top of that, most drugs fail, right? So you really have to, so the reason why drugs are so expensive is A, pharmaceutical companies want to make a profit, duh. And then B, and I say that facetiously, like, oh, what a shock. Companies want to make a profit. Well, that's why they exist. So A, they want to make a profit. B, it's super expensive, right? And high risk. So that's why they're expensive. Things can be called generic. So like Alila can take my design and start producing it if it's basically the same drug, right? So it has to contain the same active ingredients. So ibuprofen is in Motrin. It's also in Aleve, I think, and in a bunch of different companies. So somebody can call it, whatever they want to call it. If it's ibuprofen, basically it's a generic. It has to have the same form, and there's a couple of other things, like you take it orally or it's injectable, so forth. It has to be basically the same thing. I think I have you watching another thing about drugs. Generics can bring down cost. It's really a remarkable thing. The global supply chain. Just watching my time because I'm almost to the end of the deck, but I'm not going to make it. So we'll have to roll over to next week with a couple last slides. One of the things that is really interesting is if you buy generic ibuprofen, right? Because because why wouldn't you? It's like a super simple drug. Most likely it was made in China or India. So now you're importing from a foreign country. This is a great book, Bottle of Lies, highly recommend it. Great journalism, reporting on the Indian drug manufacturing market. India has really tried to kind of become the hub of the world for generic manufacturing, selling into the United States. The problem is FDA has very limited, and the book is great about describing the FDA is trying to go over and verify that they're producing the drugs in a safe way so that when they're imported back into the United States, we can confidently go down to Hannaford, grab a bottle of generic Hannaford ibuprofen and not worry that we're going to die from it, right? And so the FDA sends inspectors over to India, but they're not representatives of the Indian government. So the manufacturer has to voluntarily submit to reviews, and anyway, madness ensues. It's a great read. Just the quick takeaway is it's a little bit scary what's going out there. Let's see. I'm going to wrap up the rest of this next time. So we'll go into chapter 6 next time, but I'll cover the last couple of slides before we jump into chapter 6. So yes. So, hey, real quick before you go, in the past, I've assigned this same assignment and people get confused and think that like there's only 5 podcasts out there because they only see the first 5. There's like 80, right? So you just go to the bottom of the page and say, show me more. Or on the right side of the page, there's like, you can click and it'll show you, by month, how many have been out there. So don't be like, oh, I can only pick from the first 5. There's like 80 of them, you know, so poke around a little bit before you do it.